I think you're muted, Bill. Take two.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. First off, thanks everybody for carving out a bit of your day. Thanks to the dorm for putting this together. We appreciate the opportunity to be involved. So, the topic that we're talking about today is certainly one that's been central to our thinking and our work at Confluence. I'm sure it's been a big part of the work that all you are doing as well. And really the pandemic has given us an opportunity to look more deeply at all of our systems, all of our assumptions, all of our actions, and think differently about what's been going on. And that's certainly true for the work that we're doing with young adults in terms of helping them figure out strategies to move forward. In some ways, the pandemic is presenting new issues that are unique to this time. So how do folks live lives that are meaningful and valuable to them in the context of an environment that's really stressful and potentially dangerous from a health perspective? How have these stressors impacted mental health? How have these rearranged plans that families have impacted their family systems? These are new problems that we have to think about differently given the public health crisis. And then at the same time, the pandemic actually just sharpens and brings into focus challenges that young adults and their families have been experiencing for quite a while now. So questions like, what does it actually mean to launch? What role do families play in that process? And then how do we as treatment providers support young adults and their families in launching? These are questions that have been around for a long time, but the pandemic allows us to step back a little bit and think more deeply about them. So what are we talking about when we talk about failure to launch? As many people have noted, this is a problematic term in some ways. And I think some of the concern has been around the ways in which young adults who are struggling to move forward might perceive what this means about them. From my perspective, the reason I think the term can be challenging is because the message that it's sending is contrary to the messages that we want young adults to hear about how they begin to live adults that take on some of the responsibilities of adulthood. So for instance, failure is really a prerequisite of taking on those responsibilities, not an impediment to that. And if we're basically saying that this failure is a way that you're staying stuck, what we're also discouraging young adults to do is take the types of risks that they really do need to take in order to become living those adult lives that they want to be living. The other part that's challenging here is the idea of launching. And what it kind of implies is that place plays a fundamental role in what it means to be stuck as a young adult. So the term that we're using, I think it works, and it also has some challenges embedded within it. The way that we've typically understood that term is describing the experiences of young adults who are lacking that emotional or psychological desire or preparedness to really move forward and live lives that are more independent, more self-reliant, or more autonomous. So as we note that definition, kind of baked into it are ideas about independence and self-reliance. There's this focus on autonomy. And again, this idea that where one lives is really a part of this definition. What I want to try to do is reconceptualize what failure to launch means and think about it not simply being based on where one is, but how one is in the environment and how they're contributing to the homes or households in which they're living. The reality right now is that and the reality for a long time now is that from a financial perspective, from a logistical perspective, from an environmental and ecological perspective, living in multi-generational households makes a lot of sense. At the same time, given the public health crisis, from a public health perspective, living in shared households may also make quite a bit of sense. So my question is that if we kind of extract where one lives from this definition, what's getting in the way of young adults and what's getting in the way of family systems from being able to help their young adult children move forward with their lives? And I think part of the answer to this question is in how we imagine the solution. Again, we're talking about failure to launch in terms of independence and self-reliance and autonomy. And those terms are based on a version of human development that I think inadequately describes what that process really looks like. And we're working with young adults who are saying to themselves, I'm supposed to be more self-reliant, but my successes in high school were built on the support of tutors, of executive skills coaches, of mentors, of therapists, of coaches. We're working with young adults who are imagining that their trajectory is towards increasing independence. And then they're saying to themselves, geez, in order to seed this business, I'm going to have to tap into my family's resources. It's really not the sort of independence they might have imagined for themselves. We're working with young adults who are saying to themselves, launching is this progress towards increased autonomy. And the reality of being alone is absolutely terrifying for so many of the young folks that we're working with. So thinking about launching as that process of independence, self-reliance, and autonomy actually isn't helping young adults imagine what they're going to need to do in order to live more adult lives. So I'm hoping that what we can do is shift this definition to be one that's less focused on human development as the trajectory towards increased independence, autonomy, and self-reliance, and think about it more in the terms that are outlined in Jean Miller's work at the Stone Center at Wellesley College in her relational cultural theory. And what she is arguing is that human development is really a progression towards increasing relational complexity. What she's arguing is that we're moving as adults towards more mutually satisfying relationships. She's thinking about the building blocks of self-esteem as coming from collaboration, not from independence or self-reliance. She's imagining that when we're talking about helping young adults build more capacity, that this is happening through contribution, not independence. So I think one of the challenges that we're looking at is when we're thinking about how do we help young adults begin to live lives that are more engaged and more productive, the terms that we're using to describe that really aren't lining up with the realities of their experiences. So they're constantly striving towards a version of adulthood that's really not what their experiences look like. And they're feeling unfulfilled, they're feeling unsuccessful, and they're feeling unmotivated. So in this reimagined version of failure to launch, what we're seeing in young adults is a person who is feeling less connected to other people, and that they're feeling less willing to engage in mutually supportive relationships. We're seeing young adults who have an increased sense of boredom, a sense of hopelessness and of pointlessness in their experience. They're not feeling like there's any reason for them to continue to do the hard work that it takes to become adults. We're seeing a sense of a decrease in sense of self-awareness and a decrease in the curiosity that it requires, that's required to explore and grow. We're seeing a decreased sense of agency and a decreased willingness to take action-oriented choices that are likely to bring that person closer to their goals. And all of this is really resulting in a lack of self-esteem, a lack of From a clinical perspective, I thought I would use an experience of a young man that worked with us a number of years back. He was a student at the University of Pennsylvania, came to us in his second semester of his freshman year. By all accounts, he earned his way into the University of Pennsylvania with his hard work, his intelligence, his athleticism, and showed up on campus as a freshman with quite a bit of pressure from himself and from his family to do well there in a way that he wasn't feeling quite prepared to do. And shortly after getting there, rather than moving towards the work that was available for him to do, he found that to be increasingly stressful and quickly found his way to smoking much more pot than he had been smoking prior to going to college, and spending a ton of time playing video games. The opportunities that were out for them, he saw as overwhelming. He saw them as distracting, and wasn't able to really figure out ways to motivate to follow through on the goals that he and his family had set out for himself. In the background here, his mom was sending texts, 12, 15 texts a day. And what he was imagining was that, she was actually getting in the way of his success. And obviously there's some truth to that, but the point there being that he was sort of blaming her for not allowing him to have the young adult experience that he was hoping to have. Meanwhile, he's missing opportunities to work with professors and supportive folks at the school. He was really struggling with his roommates, and all of this began to weigh on him, such to the point that he just began to really stop attending school. You want to move forward there, Meredith? Thanks. From a psychological perspective, this was a young man who at times could come across as being quite overconfident, but really inside felt unable to manage some of the expectations that he and his family put on himself. Really had a difficult time with those expectations, and then a hesitancy to reach out and engage with some of these challenges that he had hoped for himself when he was going to school. From a diagnostic perspective, this was showing up like anxiety and depression. So some of the barriers to launch pre-COVID, some of these are based on family systems with overly entwined emotional worlds where parents and their children's emotional experiences are becoming caught up in each other. And young adults are not feeling confident to move forward, not feeling like they have the capacity to manage the demands of experience without their parents being there. And really what we have seen quite a bit of is that parents are framing their children's experience through their own lens of their past experiences. So parents who have conventional measures of success are sort of putting these expectations onto their children without having a chance to really see who their children are. In some ways, their children are pursuing their parents' goals and acting out their parents' projections rather than really living from their own experience. Obviously, some other ones would be around pre-existing mental health challenges and undeveloped executive functioning skills. Part of this, I think we can look at through the lens of neurological differences. But if we think about the brain as a use-dependent organism, and we have parents who aren't really allowing their children to take ownership of their experience, to be involved in the organization and planning and follow through of their schedules, the parents are actually interfering with some of those executive functioning skills and not allowing children to develop those through their experiences. I think some of the other barriers to launch pre-COVID that obviously continue to show up here, one of which I call the digital panacea. What I mean by this is that the stressors that might have previously compelled one to motivate and to act are now being mitigated through screen time. People are managing their anxiety by focusing in on a phone or a video game, as opposed to making committed actions towards a values-driven life. Another one here would be around the boredom that is really required for people to do the imaginative work that it takes to think about one's future. And I think so often that boredom is now being filled with screens. The next one here around social pressures, what I mean by that is what we see so frequently is parents who reward traits, not states. And so for instance, this is from Poe Bronson's work there, Nurture Sock. It's quite, it's a little old now, but I think that it still stands true, which is that parents are rewarding things like intelligence, not hard work. And those messages get sent very early that you're smart, and therefore the work that it takes should come easy. And really it's sort of the opposite of that, is that the hard work is what builds towards those successes, not those traits that one has. Lack of unstructured free play, I think, plays a huge role in this. So just a quick anecdote. I'm not a hockey fan, but my wife loves hockey, so now I watch a lot of hockey. And Wayne Gretzky in this interview talks about when he was a child and an adolescent playing hockey, they would rush out of school, run to the pond, lace up their skates, and play hockey by themselves until dark. And he said, at the time, kids were just rushing to the puck. And when you looked at pro hockey after that time, you see the game being played where everyone is kind of moving to the action. The way that he sees hockey being played now is that all of the children playing hockey are coming up with these coaches who are structuring how all these skills get built. And if you watch a pro hockey game now, everybody sort of is spread out, waiting for the puck to be passed to them. I think that metaphor works really well, which is that there's a sense that the opportunities will come to a person, and rather than having the space to pursue those without adult guidance as children, disincentivizes young adults from doing that without adults as young adults. The last barrier that I still think is at play, sort of emerging before COVID, but coming up now as well, is this idea of emerging adulthood as a developmental concept. And Jeffrey Arnett, who coined the term, obviously talks about young adulthood as a role-less role. What I hear there is the types of structures and boundaries that are required to encourage a person to pursue their interests and to experiment and to risk failure are really not present there in young adulthood in the ways that they might have been prior to that time and after the time. As children, so much of that structure is provided, and even as adults, so much of that structure is provided. We have the expectations of our financial demands and relational demands that encourage us to engage. Those things are lacking in young adulthood in a way that I think can interfere with people really moving forward. And then we got the pandemic. So new barriers, new challenges obviously have emerged in that time. One of them is the very real limited opportunities for pursuing the types of activities that would typically be thought of as young adults moving forward. So with school closings, with limited opportunities for gap years, most of the jobs that young adults might be able to pursue are the types of jobs that are also having been unavailable more recently in terms of service industry jobs. So unemployment plays a really important part of this as well. Another barrier, I think, is not all that dissimilar from the findings around the adverse childhood experiences research, where right now is a stressful time, and that stress is so pervasive and it is so unavoidable that there are very real impacts on one's experience that are limiting their ability to move forward. And then lastly, the unpredictability or inability to plan, the types of things that one might have been planning for in June may not be available at all in August or September. And then lastly, I think that in some ways, it's not all that different from how things were beforehand. Even though COVID presents a new series of challenges, fundamentally what we're talking about is helping people figure out not where to live, but how one lives. And so though there are certainly new considerations, I think what we want to help folks do is figure out what is the life that they want to be living for themselves, and what are the things that they need to do in order to help themselves move forward, and who are the people who can be a part of that team. A few shifts that we have made. Some of them are really just logistical. We've had to really think through how we do admissions and discharges. We've had to make some adaptations to how we do family time visits in terms of using video conference calls as opposed to in-person work. Probably one of the biggest challenges that we've noticed is the sort of blame COVID phenomenon. And what I mean by that is parents saying, well, there's nothing else to do, you might as well do it right now. Or the only reason I'm here is because I can't do anything else. And really, I think the reason people are in treatment is not because there's an external force limiting their options, but it's because there are internal dynamics that are influencing how they feel and what they're motivated to do. We've helped really shift our focus on self-care, both with our staff and with our participants, helping them get a sense of how they manage their experience and just monitoring how they're doing on a daily basis to help them feel more connected and more engaged. And then helping folks get a sense of what it is they do and don't have control over, and helping people realize that how they feel inside is connected to, but not determined by what's going on outside. I think this really ties in nicely with acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavioral therapies, because often what we're talking about is not helping folks untangle cognitive distortions or helping them rethink how they think, but really helping them shift their relationship to their thoughts and to their experiences. No matter what the external conditions are, one can find a way of clearly articulating their values, and one can find a way of living by them. One can focus on how they frame acceptance and what that means for them. They can think about how connected they are to their thoughts and how those thoughts are a part of their experience as opposed to determining their experience. So I think even though there's certainly additional challenges, the pandemic in some ways actually allows there to be a point of focus to do some of the work that we've always been working, that we've always been doing with young adults. I'm gonna pass it off to Amanda. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate, as a huge hockey fan, the hockey analogy. And if your wife ever wants to put together a roundtable about hockey, I'm more than happy to do that. Different than this, but I do appreciate the analogy. And Wayne Gretzky was a New York Ranger for a period of time, I will remind everybody. With that said, back to failure to launch and young adulthood. You know, this is such an interesting time right now, and certainly unprecedented in every sort of meaning of the word. And what we're finding here at the dorm is that given what is going on in the world with coronavirus, family involvement is ironically more important than ever in the work that we do with young adults. When we talk about failure to launch and young adults becoming independent and self-sufficient young people, we think about them separating from the family of origin. But in order to do that, we have found that we really need to get the parents involved in the process, especially as more and more of our clients are spending more and more time at home because they're not going back to college, and maybe they want to shelter in place with family rather than in their own apartments. So what we've had to do is really increase the amount of parent coaching, family therapy, and skill building work that we're doing with our families. Every parent at the dorm, even pre-coronavirus, was always assigned their own individual coach who is a licensed clinician. And we tell all of our parents that, yes, during this weekly session with your coach, we'll give you an update as to how your young adult child is doing. That will be about a 5-minute update. The rest of the 55 minutes are going to be focused on you and what you guys are working on and your role in the family system in terms of contributing to whatever might be going on in blocking your young adult child from launching into a more independent life. We do individual parent therapy, and we do multifamily groups as well. So we have a group where all of our families and clients are together in one group. And what we found is that for many of our clients, it's much easier for them to tell somebody else's parents how they're interfering than it is for them to tell their own parent. And for many parents, it's much easier for them to validate and support somebody else's kids, and it's much harder for them to do that with their own child. So it's really a wonderful process. We've also launched during coronavirus a sibling group, and we're going to keep that group because it's been fantastic. As more and more families are sheltering in place together, siblings are spending a lot more time with one another. And oftentimes our client, the identified patient, gets a lot of the attention, and that leaves the sibling experiencing different types of feelings or emotions within that system. So having a space for siblings to get support has been wonderful. Bringing them into the process has been wonderful, and it's been helpful for the whole system. We're really focused around skill building, so helping parents with boundaries and communication and feedback loops and understanding the different roles and norms and mores that all go on in a family system and all contribute to a homeostasis that may or may not be effective for the best functioning of all of its members. And then the last thing that we're doing is parent collectives, which are workshops that are very sort of specific in terms of topics so that parents can come and learn about specific issues as they may or may not relate to their own children or families. So when we look at how to help our young adults to launch and to find their place in this world, it is super important that we help our parents to allow their young adult child to fail sometimes. And this is one of the hardest things, I think, to ask a parent to do. But what we know is that natural consequences are often the best learning experiences. And when we rob anyone, whether they're 5 years old or 18 or 30 years old or 50 years old, of a natural consequence, we're robbing them of a potential experience to learn and to grow. So opportunities for parents, especially as their young adult children are at home with them, are to not be your child's alarm clock. Believe it or not, phones are alarm clocks. There's actual still real alarm clocks. And young adults need to learn how to develop accountability around their sleep-wake cycle. So even if you know that your young adult child is not waking up and potentially sleeping through a class or missing a test, tell our parents, don't wake them up. Let them experience that natural consequence, and then they will learn from it. Also, with more and more young people staying at home and doing virtual college, parents are seeing their young adult children struggle with school. And I think it can be very, very, very tempting to jump in there and help. You don't want to see your child in pain. But if you jump in there and help, then you're robbing your young adult child of a learning experience or the opportunity to learn how to navigate their college campuses and the different academic resources that are available to them on college campuses. Eventually, the world will go back to whatever normal is going to look like, and your young adult children won't be living at home with you, and they will be on a college campus by themselves. And it's important for them to learn how to navigate where they are in their environments. We're also telling our parents to stop parenting. And I say stop parenting so much because a certain degree of parenting, of course, is always important, but it's the so much that we want to let go of. With the best of intentions, parents can contribute to a dynamic that is inadvertently maybe contributing to their young adult child's difficulty with finding their place in this world. So we really want parents to try to stop overprotecting and shielding them from opportunities which will enable them to mature and thrive and learn how to be resilient in the face of disappointment. So some examples of this, and these are things that we see a lot of here. Stop making doctor's appointments for your young adult child, whether that's their regular PCP, a dentist, a GYN. Your child needs to learn how to make these appointments, how often to make them, and then to keep track of them for themselves. Don't cook every meal for them, and don't necessarily buy all the groceries. So many of our clients are living at home right now and are falling back into those old traps of just waking up and having breakfast laid out for them, having all the groceries in the refrigerator for them, coming home after a long day and having dinner prepared for them. This is not going to serve them well when they do go back to school or when they do go back to their own apartments and really need to be able to do these things for themselves. So we are suggesting that parents who have kids living at home right now come up with plans in terms of who does the grocery shopping and who's cooking meals, and that young adult children need to take responsibility and accountability for some of these tasks. Same things with laundry. We get a lot of clients that start working with us who don't know how to do their laundry. And when other individuals in their lives keep doing it for them, they don't learn how to do it for themselves. And then they go off to college. They don't know how to do laundry, so they just kind of recycle the same clothes until Thanksgiving break or winter recess and bring home a lot of really dirty clothes. So we want to get them out of that habit. Role modeling. One of the beautiful things about either being on a college campus or leaving the home when you start working and living in your own apartment is that there are a ton of opportunities to connect with and be inspired by adults outside of your parents or your parents' friends, inspired by professors or peers that are engaged in ethical and civic endeavors. This, in turn, helps with the development of a values framework and a sense of purpose. And these things are integral to young adult development and to helping young adults to really identify who they are, what their place is in this world, and what their passions are, what they want to do moving forward. And without this opportunity for connection to inspiring individuals outside the family environment or outside of the direct circles that they were involved in during middle school and high school, the behavior and actions of parents become even more important. And your kids are watching you. They're probably watching you even more than they're listening to you at times. So your words and your actions are important. I think it can be hugely impactful when parents are getting involved in civic actions and causes that are congruent with the values and ethics that are being espoused in the home. I think that families can engage in purposeful social and civic and ethical events in the community while they're spending time together at home and engage in discussions at dinner, turn off the TV, put away the cell phones, and sort of talk about what's going on in the world, what's important in the family system, what are our values, what are your values? Are your values the same as ours? If they are, why? If they're not, why not? But I think that there needs to be expectations around empathic and trustworthy norms of conduct, especially in the home environment. And if kids are living in your home, it is your right to have rules and to have rules that are congruent with what you value, and to let your kids know that, whether they're 10 or 25 and living with you. Validation and empowerment. Now, with everything that I said, and that was a lot of sort of boundary setting with young adults, this is a really tough time right now for everybody. And many young adults who are stuck at home due to coronavirus are feeling really anxious and really stressed, really sad and lonely and disconnected and disappointed with life. And many were working really hard to be less dependent, and now that transition has been disrupted and they're having feelings about it. And I think it's important that we pay attention to and we validate these feelings, and we support our young adults in talking about these feelings. In doing so, the goal is not to eliminate their anxiety. Their anxiety is there. That's okay. It's to support them and to be their cheerleader as they learn to tolerate these challenges and these current challenges, because the skills that they develop now in the face of the current pandemic and the current challenges, they will take with them, because there will be more challenges in life. So we want to support them in learning the coping skills that they need in the face of this adversity and in the face of adversities to come. So check in with your child, listen to their concerns, validate them, and let them know that their frustrations are understandable and normal. And then there's parent and family self-care. I think that we focus a lot, being a young adult treatment center, on how our young adult clients are feeling. And the truth is that many parents and families are struggling right now a lot too. This is a lot on everybody's place. And it is not only okay, but it is important for parents to be taking care of themselves. It is okay to prioritize your needs for self-care. It is okay to put your needs first sometimes. You know, the age-old example of being on an airplane and the oxygen is low and the masks come down, and we need to put on, you're instructed to put on your mask and then put on your child's mask, because you can't take care of your child if you're not taking care of yourself. So we're really telling parents to set their own new goals, to reconnect with their old friends, to pick up new hobbies, to make time for pampering rituals, to make time for parent-only fun, and to make time to just do nothing. And that's okay. You can just do nothing. You were supposed to be living at home without your young adult child. They were supposed to be in college or in their own apartment, and they're not right now because of this pandemic. And it's okay to have your own feelings about that and to make time and space for yourself. And in doing these things for yourself, you're really role modeling for your young adult child good self-care. And that is a positive thing. So with that, I'm going to conclude and turn this over to John, who is going to moderate our Q&A. And I could see popping up on the screen a lot of different things coming in through the chat box. So looks like there's stuff to discuss. Did we?
I think we might have lost John, so I will just play the role of John McGeehan at this moment in time, because I think he unexpectedly cut off. So I'm Sarah Harte. I'm the director of the dorm in Washington, D.C., so a colleague of Amanda and Tracy's and John's. And I just, as listening into this presentation, I just want to say thank you to all of you, because I've even thought about some new things and some new ideas. And I've been keeping up with the chat, although not as closely as I should, but I saw some really wonderful conversations happening between colleagues and folks in the audience. So I'm just so grateful that you all put yourselves out there and shared with each other. So I actually, this caught my attention and just wanted to highlight it. It's towards the end of the chat, but Chris Brightbrill said that Dr. Jane Addams says that parenting skills were never designed to work for grown kids. We have reached the limits of our parent role, from the book of When Our Grown Kids Disappoint Us. So I think it just speaks to the boundaries of how parenting changes from childhood and adolescent to a young adulthood. Let me look at some questions so that we can get Bill and Amanda to do some thinking about this. But one question is, in your experience, this is from Carolyn, in your experience, what's the number of sessions or time frame in getting parents to change their behavior? $1 million question, but what are your experiences with that?
I would say I wish there was some kind of prescription that we could all follow, 30 days, morning and night sort of thing, but I don't think it works that way. I think, the pace of change, what I talk about with parents is that it's filled with accelerations and decelerations, stagnations, regressions, progressions, all sorts of stuff. I mean, change is not linear. And if there was some kind of formula that would work for families and we could kind of set that out ahead of time, that would seem really nice. But the reality is that that process is up to them. From a psychoeducational perspective, even just helping folks better understand some concepts that we think are crucial, like assertive communication, good boundaries, self-care. Some folks take to that really quickly. It's language that they speak, even though they might not know the terms. And for other people, it's really like a foreign language and it takes them a long time. So What we hope is that folks that are working with us leave Confluence, the parents, with a few core concepts that they can carry with them, again, around assertive communication, family systems, roles, boundaries, expectations, consequences. But change is tough.
I think you're right. I mean, I see both ends. Either they're kicking and screaming, not wanting to give it up, or there's this big sigh of relief when you say to them, you can set limits or boundaries. You can take a stand. You can make certain demands on your adult child, and that's okay. So yeah, it goes from one end of the spectrum to the other.
One of the difficult things I think with mental health treatment is that, we can't put an x-ray up on the board and say, here's the break. Because it's this type of break, we know that you need this type of cast for 8 weeks, and then the bone will heal. It doesn't work like that. I wish it did, but it doesn't. And like Bill was saying, there's no prescription for how long. The course is rarely linear, and different people have different timeframes for how long things will take before they are experiencing relief or seeing change. And a lot of it has to do too with, especially with family dynamics. It doesn't start with the current family system. There is tons of intergenerational stuff that is passed down and transmitted, and all of that has to get worked through. So it's a really complicated process.
Yeah, a psychiatrist I've worked with over the years said it took them 18 or 20 or 30 years to get here. Do you think you can undo it in 18 minutes or 18 days or 20 days? And I think that's really true.
I also just want to highlight what Amanda was saying too, that it's rarely linear. So even somebody who might take to the guidance right away might have a setback midpoint due to stressors that come up in the family or other kinds of things that are happening for them. So they might be excellent students and really practicing and really motivated, and then they might have a setback and then get back into it. Same can go from the other side of the perspective too, that if people sometimes are slow to get up and running, they can then have something happen in their system that gets them going. And so, it's peaks and valleys, and it's, it speeds up and slows down over time. But that's one of the gifts that we can give people, is in working with them, really be consistent and continue to work with them even during times when they're rocking and rolling, and other times when they're struggling.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think it's also hard for parents to tease apart the mental health issues from intelligence. So many parents that I work with say, but he's so intelligent. He was number one in his class. He was, head of the football team. He was, quarterback of the football team. I'm not a football person, although my husband tries hard to get me to understand it. But, so often they can't break those two apart and think about, well, there are just mental health issues going on and we can address that or deal with that, and you get, but he's so intelligent, he's been so smart, he's been so high achieving, what happened? And, that's the age in which kaboom happens in a lot of cases. And that's really tough for, parents to deal with.
Absolutely. I want to also highlight some questions that Tracy posted in the chat at the beginning of the conversation that actually came in prior to the roundtable, which we're really, really appreciative of. So Carson Gleberman, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name, Carson, but how to engage a client's motivation when the pandemic makes even small goals, like trying to volunteer job, or just one shift or getting out of nature once a day, even more difficult. So this pandemic is making those little baby steps even harder. So how to work with a young person around that, and also to make a larger goal feel even more impossible with all these barriers around the pandemic. Bill or Amanda, do you have any thoughts about that? Go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, it's an important question, because I think that in any treatment planning process, we always have to be assessing and reassessing goals and objectives. And there's different things that happen in life that make us need to reevaluate the structure of a treatment plan and the structure of goals and objectives. And the main thing in my mind is that we always want to set people up for success. And if the goals are too big, and so big that they feel overwhelming and a client is not going to be able to accomplish them, then we're not setting the right goals and we're going to make them feel worse about themselves. So we talk a lot about successive approximations. You're at A and Z is your end goal. Well, there's many steps before Z, and the successive approximations are the little tiny goals that you can take to get to Z. So maybe getting a volunteer job is way too overwhelming during the pandemic. However, maybe going online and researching 2 potential volunteer jobs that you write down on a piece of paper is a manageable goal for that person. And then they accomplish that, great job, give them tons of praise. That increases their self-efficacy, sense of self-esteem, which then gives them an impetus for the next goal, which is, you can determine what that is. But the goals have to be manageable.
I think too, they have to be consistent with that person's values and be framed in terms of commitments that they're willing to make to themselves. And I like what you said there, Amanda, about if those steps are too big, they're not going to be realistic, even if they're consistent with values. So finding areas of motivation. We use motivational interviewing strategies quite a bit, but then aligning that with values that are really meaningful to the young person. Highlighting also that most people are making commitments and following through on those all of the time. It's just that the types of commitments that they're making feel more passive or feel less there's less agency attached to them than there might otherwise be. So kind of highlighting strengths, highlighting processes that are already at play, and then helping adjust those in ways that are moving a person towards a goal that is ultimately meaningful towards them or for them.
Thank you for that. And just to piggyback on another question from Carson, and I know this is a question that comes up a lot, even when families are calling to check in about our services in the midst of the pandemic, but any guidance or thoughts about how to improve social skills, especially things like body language, cues, and other communication strategies when somebody's on a Zoom instead of in person?
We have a milieu-based program, so we're still in person. Maybe all we're working with is sort of mask and above eye contact at times, but so we don't have, in terms of our community, we don't have a whole lot of digital, barriers there. But so we're working in a way that's probably not really relevant to that question with our clients, with our families. Again, like thinking about how people are communicating, how they're sharing what their needs are, how they're clearly expressing what they aren't willing to do. I think those they're not maybe social competencies in the ways that they're typically thought of. But I do think it's often the case that young adults are treating their parents in ways that they wouldn't or don't treat other people in their world. And so helping them see like the strategies that they're using in the milieu can also be applied to their parents. And that's actually a way that can feel more fulfilling for everybody involved.
Yeah, we're a hybrid. So some days we're in person, some days we're virtual. And what's interesting with the social skills is that what we've learned is that in addition to face-to-face social skills that we're constantly working on here, things like eye contact and spatial awareness and body language, which are hugely important and more difficult to sort of teach and practice virtually, there are also virtual social skills that we need to be practicing and honing now that we're in more of a virtual world. For instance, how to dress on certain Zoom events, depending on what the audience is. Things like right now, for instance, and I'm so bad at this, and our communications coach will, if he watches the video, I'm sure say something to me. When we talk on a Zoom, right now I'm looking at the green light. So you guys all probably feel like I'm looking at you. I'm not looking at any of you right now, I'm looking at the green light. but that eye contact makes me feel like I'm talking to you. Now I'm looking at John, who's like on the bottom of my screen. So I feel like I'm looking at John, but John, you probably don't feel like I'm looking at you at all. So these are social skills that we can practice online, especially now that even after coronavirus, I think that this is going to stay with us in certain dimensions of our life. So it's an important opportunity to teach some of our clients new social skills. We had a client show up to a group from their bathtub. I mean, like, you know, these are just opportunities.
I'm glad
Yeah,
you said that.
Go ahead,
because-
Cars.
Yeah, because we're definitely finding some challenges with our clients in terms of helping them move forward with those kinds of social skills that we know that they need to feel empowered and do the things that they want to do in whatever new normal times are going to be. But depending how long that runs, being able to help them have effective communication and connection making skills across this platform and FaceTime and others is really important too. So we'll have to invest in both.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I'm laughing as you were giving that example about zooming in from the bathtub, because that was early on in the pandemic, but it still continues. We had a conversation in our team meeting today about two clients getting feedback about our expectation that they sit up in the session during a group session and not lay in bed. And one client was saying, well, this client is in bed, and the difference was that he was not in his covers with his eyes closed. So we really had to explicitly name, you can sit up in your bed and keep your eyes open, but you can't be under your covers and closing your eyes. So it's really about just naming some of those social skills, and what we've affectionately coined the term ZORMs, which are Zoom norms. So we talk about how we need to behave in a group, and that is some similarities to in-person groups and some special qualities of Zoom norms or ZORMs. And by the way, you're all doing a great job, those of you that I can see on the screen, with your eyes open and not sitting in your bed. So congratulations. I'm mindful of the time. It's a few minutes before 4 o'clock. So I'm going to give us a break before all of our 4 o'clock appointments and close us up here. But it's actually really wonderful timing to bring up this question, because we're dedicating a roundtable next week to some of these issues of social skills in managing the social skills during this pandemic. So we're partnering with Mansfield Hall, and Scott Fitzwater is going to be joining us in a conversation about helping students rediscover social skills in a physically distant world. So you're right on time, Carson. Thank you so much for bringing up the topic. And we are here every Thursday at 3 o'clock with a rotation of partners, and we're so grateful in particular this week to Confluence and Bill for joining us and contributing to the conversation. So again, we're grateful for all of you to be here, and we look forward to having you back with us next week or any time in the future that you're able to join us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take
Thanks,
care.
everybody.
Thank you.